Welcome to Global Money Talk, brought to you by SamPro.TV. Greetings to all of our viewers from across the United States, Korea, and around the world. We're coming to you live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in New York City, the financial capital of America. I'm your host, Tai Wong, and joining me today is Richard Bayles, partner at Karani Asset Management. Richard, great to have you on the show again.
Nice to be here.
Well, I guess what we want to start with today is sort of politics versus the market. And since the close November 5th before the election, the S&P 500's up 4.5%, the S&P 400 small caps up 7.5%, and it seems the market is really trying to think themselves around what to do with the new administration. I mean, just the other day when they announced Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, gold dropped $100. I've never seen that before. It's like the second coming of Robert Rubin or something. But what are you thinking about that? You've seen a few presidential transitions in your time. Politics versus the stock market. What do you think?
Well, I think it depends on what you're trying to do in the market. If you're in the market every day, you've got to spend a lot of time, money, and effort thinking through, what does this mean? It's not an easy thing. You got to figure out who's going to win. Well, maybe you figured that out. You got to figure out, what is he saying? Well, maybe you understood what he was saying. And maybe he meant what he was saying. And maybe he'll do what he was saying. And maybe the people that are elected along with him and he chooses will help him do it. Or maybe they'll fall out. Who knows? How will other people react? What's going to happen? In retrospect, it's real easy. The election gave us a Trump bump. I don't know 6 people who figured out there was going to be a Trump bump, except perhaps Trump himself. He probably figured there's always going to be a Trump bump. But it's really hard, unless you're doing it every day, to try to play those kinds of things. It's almost like surfing and getting the right wave and getting the right wave. You got to be in the water, you got to be in front of the waves. If you're doing a day job and you're just getting in it, you're not going to get to the beach at just the right time for the day job. So leave that to the professional traders who are really working that kind of thing.
Do you recall situations where an administration that was perhaps a little unexpected was very, very good for the markets? And I mean, I was a kid. I remember Reagan, but I don't remember what the stock markets did at that time, or or Bill Clinton for that matter. Any anecdotes or memories that strike you?
Well, I wish I could remember all that stuff, because I can go back to John Kennedy, but often it's not what you thought. So Kennedy, for example, ran on the idea that we'd have a weak defense. There's a ballistic missile gap. There's all kinds of difficulty with our slow economy. He gets into office. Suddenly there's no missile gap. He cuts taxes. No Democrats expected to do that. And the economy took off very nicely. Unexpectedly, we have a war a few years later. It piles on a lot of debt, a lot of demand on top of that, and we have an inflation that kicks off for a decade plus. Nobody expected the tax cut, nobody expected to leave aside the defense, and nobody expected inflation for 20 years. It's really, really, really hard. What you need to do is decide what you do and who you are, and what you do comes from who you are. If you're impatient, if you can't stand to be in the toll line at the bridge or anything like that, and it drives you nuts, you might seriously consider this isn't for you. Because the most successful people, Warren Buffett's the best example, but there are many others, tend to be quite patient with the ideas and let them work out. So you can think of a continuum. It starts here, trading today, and it goes all the way here to, I'm never going to sell anything. And if you picked right, not selling anything is wonderful. We've been seeing buy and hold for quite a while now, because we've been having some really good bull markets. All we need is a series of choppy markets, and buy and hold won't be the fashion. It'll still make you a lot of money if you make the right decision, but it won't be the fashion.
So for the investor, when the market's just rising gradually, you can put your money in an ETF. Are there sort of market conditions where you're better off with sort of a manager who will actively manage your holdings, or perhaps actively manage but actually not move it around too much?
Well, I have a friend in our business who has a client with a very nice imagination. And the client said to him, Arthur, my portfolio is sort of like a cake of soap. The more you touch it, the less there is. So be careful about that and don't over trade it. But make sure you have your own rules. Do you sell your losers and buy and hang on to your winners? Or do you do it the other way around? Do you try to be really tax efficient? Whatever it is you do, make sure it suits you and it's what you can do and what you can carry off. We don't know what the next year, 2 years, 5 years is going to look like. A prominent firm, I can't remember which one, said, it's only going to be 3% compounded for the next decade. It's been 10 for 75 or 80 years, but it's only going to be 3 now. You have to say, somebody who can figure that out and be sure and be right, it's extraordinary. It's 1 out of 75 years where it changed like that. So,
I think I remember the article. It may have been Morgan Stanley or possibly Goldman, but I think sometimes these forecasters, from time to time, they'll make an outlandish forecast, and they figure if it hits, I'm going to be famous for this. I'm going to be Abby Joseph Cohen and do my career on, one call really helped make your career. Yeah. And if I'm wrong, they'll forget about it.
Yeah, that's right.
I think there's sometimes the honest ones will say, these are not my baseline forecasts. These are sort of my wild forecasts.
This could happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's fun. I want to move along a little bit in terms of what you said. When you're looking at investments, and it sounds like you like longer term investments, how do you balance out sort of, I guess, thematically or macroeconomic themes versus the individual's names themselves? Is this some combination of the two?
You can be very successful with themes. There are a large number of famous and successful investors who have been thematic, and of course it makes intuitive sense. We are going to need more and more and more computing. We're going to need more and more flexible and imaginative software. So those are probably terrific areas to be in. You could also say, as we do, we really care about how the people are treated and how the business is put together. And they can pay a lot. The employers can pay a lot for people who have the intellectual tools and capabilities and imagination to make those pieces of silicon hum and work. And so the working conditions for those software engineers and those electrical engineers are really good. And so we tend to look at places like that. It's harder, for example, to find someone making steel or on an assembly line who's treated well. There are a couple of companies, and we think that those companies will have serious competitive advantages against their competition. So figure out what it is you want to do, what you understand about a business, what you can find out about a business, and work that. The theme will take care of itself. If you're in the right theme, you need also, is this company profitable? Is this company over leveraged? Is the management stable, or are they figuring out what to do tomorrow, what they didn't do today? Those are important questions, and it's really important for an investor to know the answer to those questions.
Would you say that you would look at, say, a sector, and maybe you like the steel sector, or you like the real estate sector but you want to look at specifically of the real estate sector in, for people who are building data centers or who are figuring out how to cool data centers. Apparently, that's a big deal because these machines are so powerful and run so hot. Do you in your process of investment, and you've done this for a long time, do you sort of look at sectors and then dive into names, or do you look at names and then decide whether the sector is good?
If your business tells you something, you understand real estate, you understand real estate finance, you understand acquiring property, you understand dealing with contractors, and that's how you make a living. You can make really good judgments about companies doing those things. If you're a medical doctor, you probably can't. Unless, of course, on the side you own 6 apartments and buildings and that side. We look at it a little differently. About the most average business with the most average returns over the longest period of time is property casualty insurance. It's got a range of large and small companies. It's got a range of well-managed and poorly managed companies. If you think about it, demand for property casualty insurance rises about with nominal GDP. There are things rising and falling all the time. From time to time, directors and officers' liability insurance becomes tight. Some people have been burned, they get out, the prices rise. That might be a really good time to get into that. I don't think we're going to know that. I don't think we're going to know it to the right time. But we're going to, I think, know these people treat their employees really well. These employees act like owners. They act like it's their money. One of the things you really don't want to do is lose a bundle on something you didn't think of. So they are very careful and they underwrite favorably. And they have a record that goes over a long period of time doing that, and you can see why that record is put together. Unusual cooperation between the underwriters and the adjusters. A lot of information flow. The business lives on information. But as I said, it's an average business, and you'll find some winners, some losers. But if you can judge the best you can how they're operating and how they are treated, you can probably find something that really works.
You said something about your property and casualty, very, very steady. It's basically the growth in nominal GDP. That's something you can have in your portfolio and sleep at night. But you also mentioned some well-run and some poorly run. So how do you figure out poorly run versus well-run? The analyst? Would you go on site or go to an investors meeting, depending on, I guess, the business? How do you figure out what's well managed and what's poorly managed?
Well, let me go back to something. I don't want to leave the impression that it's not a cyclical business. Hell, the world is cyclical. The world goes up and down. Things happen, people get excited, people get depressed. Things change. Within this long-term average sort of growth, it can be pretty cyclical. People who understand it will take advantage of the cycles. People who don't understand it will be disadvantaged or really hurt by those cycles. So you want to find a management that has a record of doing well in both kinds of markets, up and down. They're willing to not write business and just let things go when it's dangerous, and to write a lot of business when things are in their favor. And how do they do that? How do they work together? How do their information systems work? You can ask a lot of questions about that, but basically you can look at the record, see that the management and the company is pretty stable. They're doing what they've always done. They're probably a good bet to continue doing that. And then are they well positioned? Are they trying to follow each new piece of business, or do they work on what they know? There's a lot you can get from understanding that the underwriter of the insurance for your company has been looking at school buses forever. And they write school bus insurance. And so they know when it's priced right and when it's priced cheap and when it's too dear. And if they act on that and stay out of high-priced markets and pursue low ones, That's a terrific thing to do. You can find that. You can look at their records, and you can find companies like that.
Do you often, or do you find it valuable, or have the opportunity, depending, I suppose, on the company, to talk to the officers or some of the senior management of the company? Is that something that have you found that useful in the cases that you've done it?
Usually CEOs that will see you, not always, but usually CEOs who will see you are charming people, and it's lovely to spend time with them, and they'll charm you. And sometimes you can learn something from them, and sometimes you can't. It's how you ask the questions. It's among the most interesting parts of the business to be pursuing that. But remember, they're in business to persuade you that they're wonderful, and their company is wonderful, and their stock is cheap, and you ought to buy it. So maybe there's some caution you have, but you can have fun with it. Years ago, we owned stock in a little trucking company, not so little. It was expanding out of the West Coast. It was in California, and it was doing very well in California, and then they moved up to Oregon, and they didn't do so very well. And they moved over to Washington, and then down to Idaho, and by the time they were in Denver, they were stretched really badly. And the results weren't very good, and we'd lost some money. So we had a meeting with the CEO, and I asked him, You're going from Washington to Idaho to Denver. How far is it from Denver to El Paso? And he said, I don't know. And I said, wonderful. They weren't going to be taking that any further.
Right.
So we kept the stock. They consolidated. They did fine. That's the kind of thing you can get out of a conversation. He wasn't telling me any inside information. He just didn't know where El Paso was, so you could draw the conclusion that they probably weren't expanding down there. They were going to consolidate. As I say, that's what's fun about.
That's fascinating. Some of the things that you can sort of get out of you if you ask the right question.
If you ask the right question.
I learned that because I'm in the business of asking questions. Right?
Yes.
Questions are, I think questions are a little easier. Answers sometimes not so much.
Yeah.
So when you, I guess one question is interesting for me is you do a lot of fundamental research. You look at the names that you hold pretty well. Do you have what's the exit strategy? Or is there one where, do you think I've made enough money on this? Or is it, it went from, 11 times earnings to 30 times earnings, and, I think it's overvalued? What's the thought process about exits?
You're asking a different question as well. So the answer to the different question is, about the hardest thing in our business is holding on to a great business for a very long period of time, because there will come times when it appears to be overpriced, and you'll say, oh, we could really lose our shirts in this business, in this stock, because somebody will wake up and say it's too expensive. A company going through that right now is Hermes. Hermes, the French luxury company.
Yeah.
And there are all sorts of questions about luxury. For example, if you go back 15 years, there was no China, and it's a huge part of their demand today. And maybe it's shaky. So what are they going to do about that? Oh, and by the way, sometime last summer it was trading above 50 times earnings. Now it's trading at the mid-40s. And that's about as low as it's gotten over a long period of time. So you have to make two questions. You have to decide two things. Will they keep or replace China? Or will China be in some difficulty? Think about tariffs, think about world trade, think about trade wars. Is that durable? Will they replace it? Will India become a source of several hundred really rich to well-off people? Do I pull back? Do I sell a little? Do I wait for it to be cheaper? I really want to keep it for the long run. There are several which we don't need to go into right now, there are several marvelous aspects of the business, but I'll just tell you one. My favorite is it's run by a family. If you're in the family, and they're one of their flagship products is saddles for horses. It's an ancient product. It's not so much in sales now. Every one of those kids, when they were in their 20s, had to learn how to make a saddle stitch that lies flat, that is strong, that gives. They're never going to use that as executives. They're not going to be artisans. They're going to be executives. But they have to understand how the business works. If you didn't pay attention to that kind of detail for the people running the business, you might not do as well. But your question was, what do we do about it? Should I buy back the half of the stock I sold? And some days I want to, some days I don't want to. Some days I think patience is really important. Some days I think, as you said, you don't want to let it get away from you. Well, I got some, so I'm fine. So we'll see whether we buy some more anytime soon.
That's actually a great example, and I know I've been listening to this Acquired podcast. It's a brilliant podcast. These guys seem to do a lot of fundamental research. Sometimes they're a little bit of a cheerleader, for what they, sort of. I don't know if this is sort of, the company capturing them or a little Stockholm syndrome or whatever it might be. Yeah. But very interesting things. And they said LMVH was a great business, but as you mentioned, thematically, China under Xi and this new administration of Xi is not what it was between 2002 and 2022. And he could be around for another 20 years. Luxury and conspicuous consumption is sort of out. And thematically that could be quite problematic for an Hermes or an LMVH. Can India replace them? It's a great name, but boy, it's a great boat, but is sort of the current going hard in the other direction?
Yeah. Well, the current may be going against them for a while, but one of the things they've demonstrated is pricing power. They've raised prices twice the rate of inflation over the last 7, 8, 9 years. They may not be able to do that in the future, and if they can't, will it be worth 40 some odd times earnings? That's a big premium multiple. But if they can continue to raise at some level, if they can continue to search out other markets, and China hasn't died, there are still wealthy people in China. There are still people whose families built factories, and those factories became prosperous, and they may not walk out on the street with an Hermes scarf, but they kind of like wearing them when they go to France, and they will be going to France. So it's important to think through these questions and come to a conclusion that satisfies you, and stay pretty much with your conclusion. Don't be stubborn. Don't never change your mind, but get to a conclusion where you're not going to be shaken out of your stock easily.
Right.
So,
we have a bit of time left, and I want to get into sort of your thinking. I guess you've gone through a lot of it, but your thinking process. Is there rubrics or a certain framework that you found throughout your career that have been very useful? What are those, and how have you tweaked them or changed them over time?
One of the more famous rubrics, and everyone should have them. They're fairly simple descriptions of how you think about the world, how you think about business. Everyone should have them. One of Warren Buffett's is, when you own shares in the low-cost producer in an undifferentiated large market, you have something really special. He had a slightly different, he uses, when he's pressed, a slightly different example. There are a lot of companies that make candy. He uses See's candy. But he points out that every year after Christmas, they raise the price. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's a little, but the price doesn't really matter to the customer. The customer is only going to buy candy on 3 occasions: Christmas, Easter, and when they're in trouble with their spouse. So how often do those things happen?
The last one could be quite a bit.
Yes. So an undifferentiated candy, large market with pricing power. It's a great thing. We use a different one. We're very interested in how they treat their employees. There's a screen you can use almost. It's the Glassdoor ratings written by the people who work there. Do they respect the senior management? Would they recommend a friend come work there? That's where we start. Or we start with, there's something to think about. What is the Glassdoor rating? It's kind of average. We'll do something else. Because what we want to be able to do is depend on the fact that the business is well run, the people are loyal, the people will put in the extra effort that only someone who feels well treated does. I'll give you one way you can think about this. Think of a dangerous manufacturing business. When Paul O'Neill, this is years ago, not
Treasury Secretary.
Treasury Secretary, but before he played the outfield for the Yankees and before he was Treasury Secretary, he was CEO of International Paper, and he was brought in to run Alcoa, which is a bigger company, bigger challenge. And he gave a speech to the analysts, and I happened to attend this speech right here at the New York Stock Exchange. Most of them yawned. I was thrilled. He said, "We are going to make Alcoa the safest large industrial company in the country." What's exciting about that? Think of the people who work at Alcoa. When they know that the management is looking out to make sure they're not injured, that they're not going home lame, that they're not going to lose a limb or an eye, and they're going to be able to support their families on into the future, and the job will be secure from that. They will feel an affinity with the business that will be very hard for someone else, very hard to compete with, and they'll do better work. I happen to know a guy who ran OSHA, and I said, "What did you think of Paul O'Neill?" He said, "Oh, he was wonderful." So if the guy from OSHA thinks that Paul O'Neill is doing a good job on safety, he probably was doing a good job on safety, and those were his reasons. And Alcoa did have a period of prosperity before he went off to run the Treasury.
Right. That's fascinating. I like that idea. I see the Glassdoor, and I've been asked to comment on it, and it does say if you a happy employee is a productive employee. That's a great sort of litmus test.
Yeah.
Any other ones like that? I mean, that's great. Sort of like, not to give away all the proprietary ideas, but something like that somebody may not, investors don't often think of, something so basic.
We don't have any proprietary ideas, neither does anybody else, except for the guy who ran Renaissance years ago.
Jim Simons. Yes.
That was proprietary. The rest of it is pretty open book. Buffett's got the easiest ones to quote. A first-class business at a decent price. You won't get it at a great price. Someone once asked someone, it was a Senate hearing in the 1920s looking into banking and so forth. And someone asked J.P. Morgan, the son, "What is your business practice?" And I just started to say it. First-class business done in a first-class way. You can take that all the way down to Jamie Dimon today. And if you ask Jamie Dimon, what do you think separates J.P. Morgan Chase from the competition? He will say, I think, well, I hope we do first-class business in a first-class way. If you're a corner cutter, if you're trying to cheat the customer, if you are a little sharp in your practices, nothing illegal necessarily. If you're illegal, you're going to be gone, so you're going to get caught. But if you're just simply sharp, you probably won't have the kind of loyalty that will make the business hum. And that's really important.
So my final question is, you've had developed the frameworks and rules and rubrics. But but we've seen sort of many upheavals and disasters and different things in the markets. Are there times when you say, you know what, I've got to set the rules aside, not necessarily throw them up. I set the rules aside. When something happens, there's a great opportunity. The market's crashing. There's a great opportunity, or something goes wrong. Maybe it's an accounting scandal. Something. When do you find that rules need to be set aside, or temporarily suspended? Any of those?
Well, I think my father would have said, if you set aside the rules, they're not rules. If you're going to spend your time and effort working on what makes sense to you, hang on to that. Perhaps it's the Atlantic Ocean in September when it's hurricane season and the waves are really high, but they're also curling nastily and you're going to get dumped badly in the sand. You can say, all right, I'm going to break my rule and get in for a big ride in body surfing. Unfortunately, you're also going to get dumped. Spend your time creating the rules that make sense to you, that you understand, that you can operate. Hang on to your best businesses. If something is not what you thought it was, impending weakness is probably a good time to redo that. But basically, your work is going to be your work, and you should really stick with it. But that said, somebody can come along and say, I got this idea. Buy a little.
Right.
Buy a little.
Be in it. Well, Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Wonderful
Nice
talking
to
to
see
you.
you.
Hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
We'll see you again.
And that will do it for Global Money Talk, live from the New York Stock Exchange. We're so excited to bring you daily coverage here on Sampro TV. You can check out the show anytime on our YouTube channel by searching Global Money Talk. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back here tomorrow. Have a great day.